So let's give Paul Cho a round of applause for making it here today. Really glad you're here today. So thank you. Thank you. Our study for the next 2 weeks is about some of the most disturbing people who have ever lived. People whose inspiration brought the Bible into being, whose image is our refuge in distress, and whose voice and vision sustain our faith. I'm talking about the Hebrew prophets. A book that has had profound impact upon my life is Abraham Heschel's The Prophets, which was published in 1962. Do people still read the prophets?
I make my students read part of it. So I guess so.
I want to begin our study of the prophets by reading the first page of this book. Abraham Heschel is also somebody everybody should know about, right? He writes, this is the first chapter, is what manner of man is the prophet? Student of philosophy who turns from the discourses of the great metaphysicians to the orations of the prophets may feel as if he were going from the realm of the sublime to an area of trivialities. Instead of dealing with the timeless issues of being and becoming, of matter and form, of definitions and demonstrations, is thrown into orations about widows and orphans, about the corruption of judges and the affairs of the marketplace. Instead of showing us a way through the elegant mansions of the mind, the prophet takes us to the slums. The world is a proud place full of beauty, but the prophets are scandalized and rave as if the whole world were a slum. They make much ado about paltry things, lavishing excessive language upon trifling subjects. What if somewhere in ancient Palestine, poor people had been not treated properly by the rich? So what if some old woman found pleasure and edification in worshiping the Queen of Heavens? Why such immoderate excitement? Why such intense indignation? The things that horrified the prophets are even now daily occurrences all over the world. There is no society to which Amos's words would not apply. Hear this, you who trample upon the needy and bring the poor of the land to an end, saying, when will the new moon be over, that we may sell grain, and the Sabbath that we may offer wheat for sale? What may we make the ephah small and the shekel great, and deal deceitfully with false balances, that we may buy the poor for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals, and sell the refuse of the wheat? Indeed, the sorts of crimes and even the amount of delinquency that fill the prophets of Israel will dismay, with dismay, do not go beyond that which we regard as normal, as typical ingredients of social dynamics. To us, a single act of injustice, cheating in business, exploitation of the poor is slight. To the prophets, it is a disaster. To us, injustice is injurious to the welfare of the people. To the prophets, it is a death blow to existence. To us, an episode. To them, a catastrophe, a threat to the world. When I first read that, probably 50 years ago, I was so drawn to the voice of God raging against inequity and giving voice to the plundered poor. Yet the same God full of compassion and mercy for God's people. Paul, I am delighted, perhaps the better word is tremble, to welcome you to this church today. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm glad to see familiar faces, and I know that we will have a rich conversation today. I like to have these presentations to be as interactive as possible, and for me to push some of the comfortable assumptions that we might have, so that we might gain new insight. So I hope that that will happen. If you would join me in a word of we already did pray. You prayed already. I prayed. I was clearly not.
But we can always use a prayer. So please.
Yeah. I'll pray because I think I need a little bit of prayer. Be with us to open eyes and minds and mouths and hearts. May it be you that fill everyone that is open to receive. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right, so we will get to some of the insights that Heschel pushes us to have next week. Hopefully, I'll make it next week also again. The question that has bothered me. So scholarship in biblical scholarship has been worrying about how the prophetic books have been written. How were they put together? They have not asked the question of why as deeply and as profoundly as I think they should have. So I've been wondering about the question of why. Why did the prophets write? How and why did the books come to be the way they are? And so the question that I want to explore together today is the question of why the prophetic books were written. And as it happens, I am teaching a seminar on the book of Isaiah. So we will kind of focus on the book of Isaiah and see where we can get. Okay, so I'm going to start where a conversation like this always starts, is with a question, and it's a game. And the game is this in the Bible? Okay, so the first passage I have up there reads this, and you can ask, is this in the Bible? When you, O deity of some sort, O deity, killed Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, annihilated the twisty serpent, the potentate with 7 heads. Any guesses as to whether this is in the Bible or not in the Bible?
Something similar would be.
Something similar would be. Oh, wow. So I saw her yes, no, maybe. What? Any the no's? Let's hear from the no. No, it's not in the Bible. Yeah.
I don't think so.
Okay. Why?
Well, I'm not familiar with it.
And you don't recognize it.
Right.
Yeah, and you've read the Bible, right?
Page to page.
Is it?
I don't know, I think it said something about creating Leviathan, but I don't think it says something about killing Leviathan.
Killing Leviathan. Okay. So you recognize the name Leviathan, but you don't really recognize the killing of Leviathan by God.
Killing, the
Right.
Creating.
Yeah. Yeah. I heard yeses also. Who had a yes?
I had a guess.
Okay. You have to claim your answers here.
Claim my yes.
And why did you say yes?
Because it sounds like something I read,
Okay.
and I have read the Bible. So it sounds like, it feels like something I remember reading.
Yeah, you've encountered something like it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. This is actually, so how about this one? On that day, the deity, with his cruel and great and strong sword, will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, Leviathan, the twisting serpent, and he will kill the dragon that is in the sea. No? There's a no there already? Okay. Any maybes? Any yeses? Maybes? Okay. Yeah, this doesn't sound like the Bible that you know, right? That we've read. Okay. I'll give you the answer. Stop teasing.
On the edge of our seat.
All right. The first passage is from the Baal cycle. You've heard of Baal before, right? Baal cycle. This tablet was these series of tablets were found in Ugarit, which is a coastal town on the northern part of the Mediterranean coast. It was destroyed by the sea peoples, and we thankfully have tablets, the literary remains from it, and it's talking about their god, Baal, which simply means the Lord or the Master. And I cheated before because I changed the word Litan. When you, O Baal, killed Litan, and Litan is the same thing as Leviathan in our Bible, the Christian Bible. Litan, the fleeing serpent, annihilated the twisted serpent, the potentate with 7 heads. So Baal clearly killed this Leviathan, this dragon-like creature.
Where is it in the Bible?
So in the Bible, it's in Isaiah, in chapter 27, verse 1. And it says, on that day, the Lord, with his cruel and great and strong sword, will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, Leviathan, the twisting serpent, and he will kill the dragon that is in the sea. How does that make you feel? What questions arise?
Is Isaiah saying this? It's from Isaiah, is he saying this?
Yes, the second one to your right is a quotation from Isaiah.
And the first one is just a statement in the Bible.
The first one is from the Baal cycle. It's a mythological text from Ugarit, from the same time period as Israel, a little bit before Israel was around. What observations might you make? Yeah.
Well, that one from Isaiah sounds like the day will come when God will do away with evil.
Okay, something in the future. Right.
It's in the future, the time will come
Mhm.
when God will get rid of
This evil, represented by Leviathan, the dragon. Yeah. So I think it's important to note the tense, right? Something that for Baal, it's happened in the past. For Isaiah, this will happen in the future.
Right.
Okay. And it's a date to look forward to, because Leviathan here, which symbolizes something bad, something chaotic, something evil, will be defeated. Yeah.
So can we assume that that expression, that story of God with the serpent is in the mythology of the times?
Yeah. So this was known. This is a common motif in the ancient Near East, and obviously this is something that the authors of the book of Isaiah was very aware of. It's almost a verbatim text, right? It's a verbatim citation of the Baal cycle, which means that they probably knew of it quite intimately enough to reproduce the text in like form, except they changed the text. Yeah. So we want to think about the dragon. So I think one of the reasons that the prophetic books were written the way they were written has something to do with the dragons and what the dragons represent. So we'll kind of think about that question. I'm going to give you another text that is in the Bible. I won't quiz you, right? It says, it's from the Psalms, Psalm 74. It says, yet God, my King, is from of old, working salvation in the earth. You divided sea, and sea, many translations probably has the sea, but in the Hebrew it simply has Yam, which was the proper name of the deity of the sea, and Yam literally just means sea, right? And in Baal, the Baal cycle that we just saw previously, Yam or Yamu is the name of the god of the sea that Baal, their deity, fights and defeats. Okay, you divided sea by your might. You broke the heads of the dragons in the waters. You crushed the heads of Leviathan. Here, we again have dragons, and we have a declaration that God, the God of Israel, defeated the dragons in the past, just like we saw with Baal. So what is this dragon that's in the past? we have to think about. And why is God defeating the dragons? Is it simply metaphorical? What is the psalmist and the writers of Isaiah trying to communicate? One more. This also is from the Bible, from Isaiah. Awake, awake, put on strength, O arm of the Lord. Awake as in the days of old, the generations of long ago. Was it not you who cut Rahab, another name for this dragon, in pieces, who pierced the dragon? Was it not you who dried up sea, the waters of the great deep, who made the depths of sea a way for the redeemed to cross over?
They must have dragons in their folk tales and stuff. for
Yeah,
Years before they grew up,
yeah,
and they still believed in them.
yeah. It's part of the folk mythos that was shared, right? Part of the
What
way
does
that
the
they,
dragon represent? Evil?
at least in part, yeah, evil must be one thing that the dragon represents. Yeah. What else might the dragon represent?
Mystery?
Mystery,
Uncertainty?
uncertainty. Yeah.
Not like dinosaurs. Does it take the place of many things that they feared?
Many things that they feared. Yeah, so it's not simply just one thing, but rather a collection of,
It's also powerful.
yeah, the dragon seems to be, at least in these texts, very powerful.
Does it imply that it's fire breathing?
Um,
Dragons are fire breathing.
Are they?
in the book of Job, it is fire breathing. There's a Leviathan there. It's fire breathing. It is powerful, it is destructive, it is chaotic, it can do a lot of harm. Right? Yeah.
Reminds me of dinosaurs. But
Yeah.
I don't think, would they have known about dinosaurs?
Probably not the way that we know about dinosaurs. They may have encountered dinosaur bones here and there, but I'm not sure that it would have been dinosaurs as a existing thing would have been no knowledge. Yes.
Who made the depth of the sea a way for the Redeemer to cross over?
Mhm.
Is that an explanation of why Jesus was able to walk on water?
Yes, yeah. So Isaiah 51 is talking about, also talking about the Exodus.
Yeah.
Right,
there you go.
right. So the mythological sea, right, the sea god, the sea monster, it has now somehow transformed into the Red Sea that God has divided so that the people of God can cross over. So there is now merging of different ways of looking at the world, a mythological worldview, and then a historical memory of the Exodus tradition. And Isaiah will soon, right after, will say, and you will lead your people redeemed back, right? And so all of this, the mythology, the historical memory, and then the prophetic future hope are being merged in this text this way. Yeah. So there are dragons in the Bible. Whether we remember it or like it, whatever we think of it, there are dragons in the Bible, and there are dragons in the Psalms. There are dragons in the book of Isaiah, so also in the prophetic work. So what? Yeah, go ahead.
Is serpent and dragon interchanged in the Bible, or are they different?
It's a very great question. Sometimes, right? Like in Exodus, when Moses and Aaron meet Pharaoh and turn the staff into a snake, sometimes it's called a snake. Sometimes it's called a dragon. The same word that can be translated into dragon. So it seems to be somewhat interchangeable, conceptually speaking. Yeah.
So the Eve confronted a dragon or a serpent?
Serpent. There is a serpent.
Okay.
Yeah, doesn't say dragon. Um, uh, so if you go back to creation, in Genesis 1, God creates the dragons, the great dragons. It's usually translated something different. The great sea monster, maybe in the NRSV. In the King James, it might be the great whales, right? Something like that. But it's actually the great dragons in the sea. And God even blesses the dragons. So the dragons in the Bible has a long history of development. It's not just one thing. Leviathan, as some of you remember, are something that God creates in certain texts, very proud of in other texts. But here, the text that we just looked at, the dragons are something that God defeats because they represent some kind of evil, some kind of mystery, something that is not positive for God and for God's people. So what do dragons have to do with why the prophetic books were written? That was the assignment, right? That was the question that I had posed. What does it have to do with the dragons? And the more I think about it, is that the central purpose of prophetic books, in particular the book of Isaiah, is to explain the rise of dragons in history. To call for their defeat, to ask God to defeat these dragons. And to begin to imagine a new world after the dragons are defeated. So, another question. The book of Isaiah, where do we see the dragons? The dragon in the book of Isaiah is the exile, is the destruction of the temple, is the destruction of the Davidic monarchy. It is the forced migration from their homeland into a foreign place. It is the oppression and that they experienced while they were living in Babylon. Like the entire period that began with the Babylonian conquest of Jerusalem into to the end of the exile, when they were allowed to return to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple that was destroyed. That seems to be the dragon. And the entirety of the book of Isaiah and also Ezekiel, also Jeremiah, kind of the major prophetic books, are centered around explaining why the exile, why this dragon happened.
Is it a metaphor, the dragon, for these things happening?
I think it's a metaphor in the fullest sense of the metaphor. If you think of metaphor simply as a figurative language, I think we don't understand. I think it's a metaphor in the sense that it gives expression to something real that they experienced, even if it's not literally the dragon that's flying across the ocean or something.
I don't want to extend this too far, but as an Englishman, my patron saint was St. George, who killed the dragon.
There you go.
And why and for what reason did he kill the dragon?
Saint
St.
George. I'm not sure.
Okay.
That I don't know. Not being an Englishman.
Fair enough.
Did they have the devil in those days, or was that a later invention?
I think it's a later invention. Yeah.
I thought maybe this would be their devil for that.
Kind
period
of.
time.
It's kind of like that. Yeah. So I want to locate this dragon in the book of Isaiah at least. In the book of Isaiah, if you've read it, from beginning to end, there's an interesting change of tone from chapter 39 to chapter 40. Right? If you remember in chapter 39, Hezekiah is king in Jerusalem. And Hezekiah has recovered from his illness. And the king of Babylon comes to visit him. And Hezekiah, proud that this Babylonian king has come to visit him, shows the Babylonian king the riches of the kingdom. These are all the treasures that we have. This is the military power that we have. This is the armory that we have, for unstated reasons. Perhaps because Hezekiah was seeking a political military alliance with the Babylonian king against probably the Assyrians at this time. Because Hezekiah has done this, the prophet Isaiah is sent to Hezekiah, and Isaiah is to declares to Hezekiah, because you have done this, the exile will happen. The Babylonians will come back. They will take all the riches of the kingdom. They will destroy the temple itself, and exile exile your descendants. And Hezekiah's response is, the word that you have spoken is good, because he thought, at least it will not happen in my days. Great king. I would like that king. I would like that king for myself. And so you expect that the book of Isaiah will continue and begin to explain what it is this exile happens, have an account for this exile. Well, if you turn the page on chapter 39 and start reading chapter 40, what you get is, comfort my people, says your God. What has happened between 39 and 40? The unspeakable has happened. The unspeakable is the destruction of the temple. It is the exile. It is the humiliation of the people, and of course of their deity. And because it is unspeakable, they don't talk about it. It is so traumatic that they do not have language for it. And the language, the image, the mythos, the motif that the writers of Isaiah come up with to begin to think about this is that of the dragon. So the dragon kind of stands in the place for that which cannot be spoken, the disaster that has arisen in history to the people of God. It describes that which they don't want to think about, that which they want to speak about, that which they cannot begin to understand. Because dragons in the ancient world were about creation. Why did God defeat dragons in the mythic past? Right? Because understanding that question will help us to understand, why does God need to defeat the dragons again in the prophetic present? Right? A creator deity, the mythologies of the ancient Near East, of which, as we saw, ancient Israel also knew, the creator deity fought and defeated the deity of the sea, Yam, or Tiamat, as in the case of the Babylonians, and its chaos monsters, the dragons, right? In order to create cosmos. And what Isaiah is saying is that the dragons have come back. They have risen among in history to torment us, right? And so to say that the exile is something like a period in which dragons are reigning and roaming the earth is to say that our experience of the world is as if everything has been destroyed and everything has returned to a anti-creation state. It is a state that they cannot, and they will not be able to withstand or survive. And so we have the rhetoric that we saw of before, right? What Isaiah is saying, why do we need the arm of the Lord that destroyed the dragons in the past? Because the dragons have come back. The dragons have come back. And the only being who is able to destroy and defeat the dragon is is the one that has done it in the past. So this is the reason that Isaiah needs God back to defeat the dragons in the present. So Isaiah and other biblical books understood the Babylonian exile as akin to the undoing of creation and the unleashing of chaos dragons. For them, the destruction of the temple was catastrophic beyond what we might be able to imagine. It might be, we might begin to understand it when we think about 9/11 in this country. Our sense of security was shaken beyond the actual physical and destruction of life and material. Our sense of security was shaken on 9/11. But it was, and not only that, for them, the destruction of the temple was in fact the house of God, which raised the question: was God in the house? What happened to God? So it's not simply that a building fell, but rather that God might have also suffered harm, maybe even death, and not simply defeat. So the Babylonian exile, especially the destruction of the temple, was symbolically something catastrophic at the universal level, at a cosmic level. And it seemed that many Jews who were exiled to Babylon especially jumped ship. Why wouldn't you? Clearly, the Babylonians and their deity is more powerful than our God. And so if you read 2nd Isaiah, there's a lot of polemic about idolatry. They're not gods, they're just images that are made by hands. Why spend so much time talking about idol worship? Because there were idol worshippers, people who decided the God of Israel is no more. Clearly, if the God of Israel survived, the God of Israel is far weaker and not worthy of our worship in comparison to Marduk, the god of the Babylonians, who claim to be who are the imperial power in this thing. So for Isaiah, for people who experienced this, the Babylonian conquest, the exile in Babylon, was really the destruction of their entire way of life and way of understanding their world. Either they jumped ship and adopted this new way of thinking, or they held on to the old way of thinking, but in a way that acknowledges that something terrible has happened. The dragons have come. And Isaiah's response is to say, God's going to come back and destroy these dragons.
I'm just wondering, were the Babylonians really cruel to the exiles, or was they fairly fair and some got to work their way up into the channels and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, the Babylonians were not as cruel as the Assyrians were back in the day. The Assyrians were known to have been much more cruel to the conquered lands, and their policy was to move populations around so as to intermix different nationalities, people groups, so that they could not continue to have their own identity, right? To kind of erase their identity. The Babylonians were a little bit kinder, I guess. They were slightly more cosmopolitan and were willing to allow different ethnic groups, people groups to kind of commingle so as to survive. And so Judah survived to an extent for a short while as a colony, kind of a colonized satellite government of the Babylonians. And even within Babylon, we know that Jews did fairly well. Right? Not everyone, but there were some people who were able to start businesses and work for the government in a way that allowed them to have a decent living. So Babylon actually becomes an important Jewish center of life. Yeah, but on the whole, if you think about siege warfare, people die of thirst, of starvation, and the conservative estimate is that about a third of the population perished. So it's kind is a relative term, I guess. Yeah.
But
Yes.
after the exile, they returned to what?
So 539 and following, they were allowed to return to Jerusalem, and what they returned to was a decimated landscape. It was not empty because people were still there from previous generations, but what they came back to was a decimated landscape without a temple, much of the infrastructure destroyed, and they had to build back from a very difficult situation. Yeah. Yeah. So that's the dragon. And
Isaiah utilized him in his speeches and stuff, the dragon.
right, the writers responsible for the book of Isaiah referred to the dragons. Yeah, because they conceived of this exile as a dragon-like, chaos-like situation. So the God who defeats the dragons of exile, is acting like a creator God, is creator God. That is to say, the Israelite belief that God is created the heavens and the earth, maybe it doesn't begin here, but firms up, becomes articulated in a more powerful way during and because of the exile. So people debate, when did the Israelites begin to think that their deity created the heavens and the earth? That in fact God created all things, because the Israelites prior to this time would have thought about Yahweh as belonging to a pantheon of gods, with other deities perhaps responsible for the creation of the heavens and the earth. One of the time periods that people began to think that the God of Israel is a creator God of all things is during this time. Because God had to act like a creator God. God came to be understood as a creator God. So if we value the fact that God is creator in our understanding of God, it is probably at this time that it began to become more prevalent and strongly articulated. So here are some passages. We won't need to read everything, but do you now know? Have you not heard that Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth? He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. This is what God the Lord said, the creator of the heavens, who stretches them out, who spreads out earth with all that springs from it, who gives breath to its people and life to those who walk on it. These are familiar to us. This forms the part of our understanding of God as creator. But these types of articulations would have been somewhat new to the ancient Israelites, especially in exile. And what these passages are getting to is that the Babylonians claim that Marduk, their deity, created the heavens and the earth. And this is a counterclaim against the claims of the Babylonians that their God is creator. A few more passages here. I don't really need to read them all. First one, it is I who made the earth and created mankind on it. My own hands stretched out the heavens. I marshaled their starry hosts. So God became creator, or the Israelites realized that God is creator only because of the experience, in light of the experience of exile.
Is this the genesis of the Messiah concept as well?
The Messiah, the concept of the Messiah likely pre-existed, like during the monarchic period, because the concept of Messiah is connected to the Davidic kingship. But he would have experienced significant transformation during this time period. Like the hope for a Davidic king to come, because there is no longer a Davidic king present, came into being, came to be refined during this time. Let's see. One surprising way in which this happens is that in Isaiah 45:1, Cyrus, who is the Persian king, is called the Anointed One, or Messiah, right? His Messiah, that is to say, God's Messiah. So it changes. It begins to change in a very surprisingly different ways from their monarchic period during this exilic period. Yeah. So another kind of theme that changes throughout this time. Yeah. So God becomes creator at this time. Messianic hopes arise. But then what happens? So the second kind of thought experiment is, if God created all things, right? So we know who will defeat the dragon of exile. But who unleashed the dragon? If God is the creator of all things, who made it happen? The surprising answer, right, that perhaps the writers of Isaiah did not at first anticipate, is that the person, the being who is responsible for unleashing the dragon of exile, is the same as the one who is responsible for defeating the exile. Here's a text that I alluded to before. Comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and cry to her that she has served her term. And this is talking about the destruction of the temple, about the exile, right? That her penalty is paid, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for her sin. God is the one who's responsible for sending the Israelites into exile, or the Judahites, more specifically, into exile. Right? Because to claim that God is a creator of all things is to acknowledge that God is responsible for all things. So we have things like this: I am the Lord, and there is no other. Besides me, there is no God. So the monotheistic impulse within Israelite religion comes to be articulated more strongly at this time. God is the only God, so that they may know from the rising of the sun and from the west that there is no one besides me. I am the Lord, and there is no other. I form light and create darkness. I make real and create woe. The Lord does all these things. The Lord does all these things. So we have, with the exile, with the notion that God is the creator God of all things, we begin to see that God is the one who is responsible for all these things, even the unleashing of the dragons. And if you read First Isaiah, the entire program of First Isaiah is to try to explain to the people that the reason for the punishment for both the northern kingdom of Israel and for the southern kingdom of Judah, that is to say, the Assyrian conquest of Samaria in 722 BCE and the Babylonian conquest of Jerusalem in 587 BCE, is God's doing. And why does God do this? Because of sin. And the consequence of sin are these things. So God is responsible. So God who unleashes and defeats the dragon of exile, creates will and woe, becomes the one God of both good and of evil.
So that's another way that the idea of a Messiah enters through the sin door.
Mm-hmm.
God introduces sin in the form of the dragon, and so God also introduces the Messiah as the way out of the sin which God, in essence, created.
Right. I understand what you're trying to say. Yeah. I think
this is all terribly circular mythology, and at some point you would think someone would step back and say, "This is mythology."
Well, this informs. I think you're right in the sense that this informs the ways in which ancient Israel, biblical religions, including Judaism and Christianity, come to understand God, and therefore has to deal with some of the problems and the issues and the difficulties that this develops, right? And part of the answer to that is messianism of a certain stripe and a theology of a certain type. So theology, what we are seeing is Israel's understanding of God, it begins to transform and to mature and to differentiate itself because of these historical challenges.
But the dragon, in essence, is the acknowledgement of the fallacy of the mythology that they had accepted, because the mythology failed because God didn't keep the kingdom as he promised to keep, and as they say he promised. They create the promise doesn't get fulfilled.
So I
enter the dragon to explain.
So Isaiah would say, so the book of Isaiah would say it differently, right? Says that the unleashing of the exile is part of God's plan, right? And therefore God also has a solution for it, which to a certain extent includes the concept of Messiah. Yes.
But isn't the thing that causes God to do that mankind's sin?
Yeah.
So that it's not so much that God wanted this dragon,
Right.
but mankind sinned, and so then God said, "This is part of the process to recover from that.
Mm-hmm.
Is you're going to suffer,
right?
And then I'll redeem you."
Yeah. So that's the argument of Isaiah. Like, why did this exile happen? Why did this terrible thing in history happen to God's people? And one of the answers that Isaiah gives repeatedly is God is responsible. God warned you, but you kept on sinning. God warned you, you kept on sinning. God warned you, kept on sinning. And now the time has come for this devastating thing to happen, which ends up being the destruction of the northern kingdom and then the exile.
And we're still living with that in the Middle East, where people are trying to hurry the coming of the kingdom by doing horrible things that will necessitate God's triumph and the solution of the problem. And this is just a terrible mythology to submit yourself to when you create God's promises and then demand that you fulfill them. And so we've got thousands and millions of people killing each other because some of them think they got God's promise that it's their land.
Yeah, I am not an expert on Middle Eastern affairs, but agree that terrible things are happening. So dragons create a theodicy question. If God created all things by defeating dragons, if God unleashes and defeats dragons in history, then is God responsible for good and for evil? And yes, and we exposed some of the answers to that question already. Sin is one of the answers that the book of Isaiah and the prophetic corpus gives to us. One of the reasons that dragons arise, exiles happen, bad things happen, is because of sin. Part of the response is the persistence of this understanding that there are divine-like beings, like the dragons that come up, right? That God, to a certain extent, did not have total control over. Okay, but one of the, I think, one of the honorable, like one of the merits, one of the genius of the biblical tradition, is that it takes this problem seriously. The book of Isaiah does, but we have also things like the book of Job that takes on faith at face value. What happens if we actually take this question very, very seriously, that God is responsible for all good and for all evil, even if that suffering, even if that pain be undeserved by sin or explainable by some mythology, right? And so the book of Isaiah, while responding to the crisis of the exile, I think comes up with theological traditions that we value very highly, like God is creator. God created all human beings. God created all nations. We have things like God is in control of all history, right? As troubling that may be, but it also creates theological problems that it cannot solve, and it will take other biblical authors to wrestle with. I'm going to leave with this question. So we're going to review the kind of the thesis of what we're talking about here today. The central purpose of prophetic books is to explain the rise of dragons in history. We've explained that the dragon in history in the book of Isaiah might be understood as something like the exile. And that's good, right? Good in the sense that it does its job. Why did these dragons happen? And sin is one of the answers that he gave. It calls for the defeat of these dragons by God. Even if God was the one who is in control of and releases these dragons, God is the one who is called on to defeat it. The question is, the purpose is, the ultimate purpose is to create a new world after the dragons. How do you conceive of a world after trauma? How do you conceive of the world after the foundations of your thinking and your thoughts have been undone, right? What does it take? And I think this is where we begin to get to what Heschel was talking about. What are the sermons? What are the ethical principles that become the building blocks for rebuilding this new world after trauma? So I don't know about you, but oftentimes I look at the world personally and in my personal life, in our nation, in the world at large. There are a lot of dragons. Like my dragon was this thing this past week, my foot. And you might have other dragons in your life. You might see dragons in your local communities, in our nation. And you're like, there are dragons here also in our life. There are traumas that disorient us, that disrupt us, that destroy a lot of these things. And I think one of the reasons to read a book like the book of Isaiah is to say, how did Isaiah begin to rebuild the world that was destroyed by these things? What are the visions? What are the ethical norms? What are the hopes and dreams that the writers of Isaiah worked with in order to begin to rebuild a world that could both claim that God is good, but acknowledge the evil in this world, the dragons in this world. That acknowledge that God sometimes does things that are mysterious, that seem to be harmful to us, that we don't understand. How did Isaiah begin to understand his world, right? Their world, and how might we learn from that? So one of the ways that I recommend that I read the book of Isaiah, and I recommend all of us read it, is to look at these prophetic works as a parts shop. My car broke down; it has to be rebuilt, right? What are the parts that we might take from this book? What are the insights that we have from this book that we might begin to piece together our own world? And I think Heschel starts on a good journey. These prophets are crazy people they make much ado about trifle things, about a person who has experienced injustice. What does it mean for us to begin to rebuild a world that's been destroyed based on those principles? So next week when we come together, we want to begin to think about how the prophetic tradition, the book of Isaiah in particular, begin to rebuild the world that has been destroyed and disrupted by these dragons. So, thank you.
Thank you. That was great.